Hello, Phil here from Wings of Pegasus, and welcome to another analysis video. On the agenda tonight, we have George Lynch, and this is going to be George just jamming along to a backing track, and this was part of the Headbangers Ball on MTV. So let's get George up on screen and see how he gets on. I'm just going to jump in here just in case my face melts at any point and then I can't say anything. But George Lynch, I'm a big fan of George's, been to see him live, and of course Dokken and then Lynch Mob as well. But George's playing style, what I love about it is the fact that he throws together lines that you don't see coming. He just really does almost throw caution to the wind, and sometimes you even feel like George isn't sure whether this is going to work, but he's going to go with it anyway and see where it ends up. Some of the techniques going on here really cool. The fact that when he goes into those dive bombs, if you don't know what a dive bomb is, it's when you push your whammy bar all the way into the guitar, therefore decreasing the tension on the strings, and that will really decrease the pitch of the strings, and it is like a dive bomb. It's exactly what it sounds like. But the fact that when he does those and then he goes into a bend and catches it on a bend, so that when it comes back up, he's then into a bend. It's just a really cool sound. I don't want to get too technical with explaining or trying to explain what George does, but he throws in so many tiny little techniques and really subtle things like pinched harmonics that are only just there, but they're definitely in there. And the fact that his tone here is so cool because it's dancing on the edge of overdrive, but it's not super heavy. You can hear sometimes that sustain just dying ever so slightly. Another classic George technique, look out for it, is where he taps, but he doesn't tap with his fingers. He sometimes comes in with his pick and taps the side of the pick on the string, therefore giving a different sound. And interestingly, I heard this rumor about George when he was playing with Van Halen back in the day. Of course, the 80s, these guys were all just circling each other. They were all really part of that 80s metal and hard rock, and Van Halen was the guy that tapped, and he said to other guitarists and apparently to George as well, if they're playing at the same show, Van Halen would say to George, don't do any tapping because tapping's my thing. It's kind of understandable, the fact that Eddie had spent so long working on that tapping technique, but then George in the same circles, check out his technique. George can tap with the best of them. The fact that he uses the side of that pick sometimes as well, it's almost like he tenses his whole arm and therefore gets a reflex action where it just shakes over the string, and the speeds that he can get just tapping with the side of that pick are really impressive, and again gives his playing a totally different sound. But as you can probably tell, this is one of those videos that you could spend years analysing just because of the techniques in there that are so subtle but so well put together. But let's get back into watching a little bit more. I just want to jump in here just to say about George, the fact that he can just melt your face from nowhere. And sometimes I've been to see him live, and sometimes he can be a little bit hit and miss, but it's just that's what you get with George, the fact that he can absolutely nail something that is so epic, and sometimes he can be a little bit off, but it's all worth it for the fact that those little bits, I mean, this is such an amazing jam over the top, and this backing that he's got, everything is so spot on, so well phrased. And this just shows what George Lynch can do. And I don't know whether you spotted it, but just that technique of palming that pick so quickly so that then he could play with his fingers and his thumb, playing that little descending run. He does everything so quickly, it's hard to spot sometimes because he's so efficient. The fact that he's throwing in that really wide vibrato, and then when he's not doing that, he's going to a wide whammy bar vibrato. So he's throwing that in there as well, keeping it all so consistent and so cool. I don't want this video to go on for too long, but this kind of thing is right up my street, as you can probably tell with my hair and if you've listened to my music at all. But let's get into listening to some more of George. And we're just going to get into a little bit more experimental playing. He's just about to get back into it. There's only 45 seconds about left, so you guys can check out this whole video if you want to. I'm going to put the link in the description below. But just a final word on George's playing, the fact that I haven't even mentioned alternate picking or his economy picking. He does sweeping as well. He's got so much technique in the right hand. Sometimes you saw him actually striking the strings with his thumb as well. So there is so much that George puts into his playing. You get so much bang for your buck with George. He's worked on so much stuff. Just have a little listen to the whole Wicked Sensation album. The lead work on that is stellar, and Dokken, of course. Every solo that George does, you know it's George playing just because of his style, the way that he phrases his runs, all those sequences he puts together that are just impossible to predict. So in terms of having your own sound, George absolutely has it. And just the fact that George is such a cool guy, just looks so cool, and when he's on stage he just struts around in total control all the time. I was fortunate enough to meet him a few years ago with some of my mates. We were waiting to watch one of his gigs in London, and it was quite a small gig, quite an intimate venue, so it's really cool to see him that close up. And he was just in the bar before he actually did the gig, so we managed to speak to him about Dokken and Lynch Mob, and he's just a really cool guy, really nice guy to talk to as well, and really open about everything back then and now, and his relationships with band members, and why one guy might not be singing and why now he prefers another guy. But really interesting to chat to George, but just ultimately just a really great guy to have the time just to, you know, sit down and have a chat with some of his fans. And in the 80s, I'm not surprised that Eddie probably told him not to do quite as much tapping, because he certainly would step on Van Halen's toes if he was given that same exposure that Van Halen was was. I know that Dokken maybe didn't get as much as Van Halen, and certainly Lynch Mob after Dokken certainly didn't get as much coverage as the mainstream bands. I think maybe George was a little bit late in the late 80s, early 90s, whereas if he'd maybe been around a little bit earlier, maybe late 70s, if he'd got a break around that time, he would have been absolutely huge. So thanks so much for suggesting this video for me to take a look at, and keep those suggestions coming in the comments below. Let me know what you guys think, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and I'll see you guys at the next one. Rock!